Hey, I'm Charles with Rocky Mountain. Today I'm going to show you guys how to rebuild a pole starter on a Polaris ATV. The machine we're using is this Polaris Sportsman 500, but it will be a similar process for just about any Polaris ATV. It's really simple to do, so let's get started. To do this job, we're using some common hand tools. That includes both standard and metric sockets, and then you're also going to need either a pick or some small needle nose pliers. We're also going to be using some safety glasses, rubber gloves, rags, and some waterproof grease. And depending on what machine you're working on, you might need some gasket maker as well. This is the pole starter rebuild kit. These are available on our website, and to make sure you get the right one, type in your year, make, and model when you go to order this. And what these come with is replacement springs, you have a replacement reel, rope and handle, and all the necessary hardware to get this thing rebuilt. To gain access to the pole starter, it's going to be a little bit different process from machine to machine, but basically you're going to unbolt both of these mud flaps and then remove the footrest. On our machine, we're going to have to disconnect this low range linkage rod as well. Now we can remove this pole starter housing. So to do that, we're going to remove these 8mm head bolts all the way around the perimeter of it. And before I remove this, I'm going to clean any dirt or debris away from it so it doesn't fall down in. Now that we have those bolts out, we can remove the cover. Just keep in mind, these are kind of stuck on here and sometimes they take a little bit of pressure to come off. So we're actually going to use a pry bar from the other side. There's a couple tabs sticking up on this cover. We're just going to tap it out and remove it. And before you tap anything, make sure you double check and make sure you have all the screws out. With the cover removed, we did leave some gasket material behind, so we're going to need to clean that up. We're going to use a gasket scraper and then a rag. We'll go around the whole housing, make sure none of that's left behind. Over at the bench, we're going to clean off the sealing surface on the pole start housing. Again, we'll use that gasket scraper and a rag. After that, we're going to remove all the old parts. Now, some common issues with these is sometimes the pole rope just breaks or one of these internal parts break. So ours actually works just fine, but we're still going to remove it. So I'm going to loosen that center bolt with a 10mm socket. So for us, we've unwound the rope and we're going to pull it out of the way. But a lot of you guys, you can just loosen up that center nut and remove everything. So right now I just need to let this unwind. Now that we have the rope out, I can remove that nut the rest of the way. We've got that ratcheting mechanism. There's a spring under here. And you can pay attention to how this stuff comes out and it's going to help you with reassembly. Now there is one piece we're going to reuse, and that's this bushing inside the reel. So we'll pull that out and set it aside. Next thing we need to do is remove this spring. So I put some gloves on to help protect my hands. You don't want this thing springing out at you, so be really careful. A lot of guys, you might have issues with this spring actually being broken in a couple pieces, but in either case, the outer section of the spring is still going to be under tension. So the easiest thing I've found to remove this safely is some needle nose vice grips. I'm going to clamp on that ear that comes around and on the inside of that spring. And I'm just going tight enough to grab onto this and hold it all together. But I don't want to actually smash it against the case right there either. And I'm going to put a rag on top just in case, and we'll work this out. So that's holding it all in one piece. And before you let these vice grips go, I recommend just putting this over a garbage can or something like that and holding it away from you. Or if you don't want to do the trash can thing, you can always put a zip tie around this and release the tension. Now I've gone ahead and finished cleaning up this housing. We're ready to reinstall the recoil spring. Now this hook at the top, make sure that's in the same orientation as the one we took off. Then we've got some safety wire holding all this together. So the one that's wrapped around it, I'm going to remove that. So I've got that hook in place and the spring is wrapping around counterclockwise. So I'm going to press down on this. And if you're reusing an old spring for some reason, you can wrap it one wind at a time. So I'm pressing that down, and then there's that safety wire around the circumference. And you can either pull up on that to remove it, or you can use some side cutters to snip it. And then I'm just going to slowly let that spring expand out. We'll remove that safety wire. Once you have the spring installed, we need to install the reel. So the spring's just going to hook right onto this tab. So just be aware of that when you're lining everything up on that hook on the inside of that spring. And before we install this reel, we've got that bushing. We're going to apply some grease to the inside and outside of it. And this pin, that little tab's right underneath it. So I'm going to start maybe about the 1 o'clock position and then rotate that tab right into the hook. And then just to make sure you have everything fully seated, it's a good idea to turn this just a little bit, make sure it has some tension on it. So we know we've got everything lined up correctly. So the next thing we need to do is we have a spring for the pawl. Some of these springs have a longer arm. If your spring does, that's going to be facing down. And then we've got the pawl, and the other tab for the spring is going to be right in that groove. We'll just make sure that works. Next, we're going to install this clip onto our cover. And we've got those two little ears coming down. So this open end, it's going to be facing right about here once this is installed. So just be aware of that. Then we have this bolt through the middle. And this bolt, if you need a torque spec, it's going to be 5 to 6 foot-pounds, but we're just going to tighten it down. And before we wind this up, we're just going to verify that the pawl is actually working. So if we rotate that reel counterclockwise, pawl comes out, it goes back in when it returns. So now we're ready to pre-wind this reel. We're going to wind it up 6 to 7 turns counterclockwise, and we're going to line up this opening in the reel with the opening in the housing. So we've got 6 turns right there. I'm putting a little bit of pressure down on the reel and holding this in 2 spots. There's the little tab coming up on the other side and this area for the rope. Want to make sure that doesn't unwind. After that, we need to feed the rope through that hole. And to help pull that rope through, you can either use some tweezers, some really small needle nose pliers, or a pick. So once you have the rope pulled through, you want to tie 2 knots in that, and I just went ahead and had my friend do that for me. We'll pull that all the way down. We'll set both of those knots down into the little recess. And then we're just going to let that rope reel in real slow. After that, we're going to apply a little bit of grease inside that starter bushing. At this point, we're ready to reinstall the cover. Now, a lot of times you're going to be able to get a gasket for your cover, but this model, the gasket is actually discontinued. So we're going to use some gasket maker. We're going to apply thin film of this stuff all the way around and let it set up before we install it onto the machine. Now, if you had to do the same method as us, you want to check the tube and see how long it needs to set up before you install it. We're going to wait a few minutes before we put this in place. Back at the quad, we'll install the cover. Next, we're going to install the low gear linkage. Once you've done that, you can go ahead and reinstall your footrest and the mud flaps. And that's all there is to rebuilding the pull start on your Polaris ATV. It's pretty simple to do, and if you need the parts, they're available on our website. We also have a lot of other accessories for your ATV on there, so check that stuff out. And if you have any questions about the process, leave those questions down in the comments below. And if you want to see more helpful content like this, subscribe to our channel. I'm Charles with Rocky Mountain ATV MC. Thanks for watching.